Hey guys, you're listening to episode 116 of the Finish Line podcast, where we discuss the intersection of faith, generosity, and personal finance. My name is Cody, and I'm here with my co-host and brother Keelan. Today, we're talking to CPA and serial entrepreneur Leigh Ann Horton. Leigh Ann has a natural knack for numbers and initially found herself rigorously tracking her giving. However, through a number of experiences, she has learned to hold things loosely and follow the lead of the Spirit, both in her generosity and her businesses. Her stories are overflowing with the joy and excitement that comes along with generosity, and you won't want to miss the rest of her story. Before we get there, this podcast has grown almost exclusively by word of mouth. For those of you who have helped get this message out there by sending a link to a friend or sharing on social media, we just wanted to say thanks. It really makes an impact. If you think this or any other conversation is thought-provoking or inspiring, take a moment to share it with somebody. We have been blown away at how God has used some of these stories to make a radical impact in the world of generosity and missions, and you can be a link in that chain. All right, let's get to the interview. All right, we have the privilege once again to have Julie Wilson joining us as a co-host, and we are thrilled to have Leigh Ann Horton today on the podcast. Leigh Ann, thank you so much for taking some time to be with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, so Leigh Ann, tell us a little bit about your upbringing and your spiritual background as well.
Okay, I was raised in Winter Park, Florida by two wonderful parents, and I am the middle child. I have an older brother and a younger sister, and we were raised in a beautiful Christian home. And obviously, nobody was perfect, but they are pretty great parents, and I have pretty great siblings. And from an early age, going to church was important for our family, and being generous was important, and family and friends were important. Relationships were important.
When would you say along the line that God really started to get your attention, that your faith really became real and a part of what was kind of guiding your direction from that point?
You know, I think I had parents who modeled that out as we had trials or tribulations that went on. I saw them lean into the Lord. And of course, you know, you go off to college and maybe don't go to church every Sunday like you were raised. But soon after I graduated from graduate school and got married within a couple years after that, I realized how important, you know, having a relationship with the Lord was. And my husband is the son of a Baptist minister. And so he was also raised knowing how important that personal relationship is. So it was kind of right away. But I as a young married couple, we sought out other Christian married couples. We took classes together, Sunday schools together, learned how to live, you know, in a new relationship, being married for the first time as well.
So Leigh Ann, at that time, when you were out of graduate school, married, what was kind of your plan? What did life look like? What steps did you start to take as you started to build your family and your career?
So I have to back up, I guess, and tell you that my dad was a hard-charging, very gregarious guy who has a big business. You know, he's an insurance salesman. So having a job was really important. So when I was in college, you know, he was like, you are not going to get a degree in English. You are going to get a degree in something that you can make money at. Not that you can't make money with an English degree. So along the way, I was always good at math. And I told him, hey, you know, I think this accounting thing might work out. So he was like, you know what? I met a woman the other day who's really smart and she was a banker. And I think that's a great career. You know, little did he know. I mean, I don't even think he realized the difference between maybe a banker and a CPA. So I got my master's in accounting. And so it was pretty clear that my path was going to be that track. So I worked for public accounting in New York City when I started my career, and then moved back here and was with KPMG here in Orlando.
Now, I know generosity has been a major theme in your life. I'm curious for where in the scope of some of the rest of what you've shared, God started to plant some of those seeds and how that journey has kind of played out over time.
Getting ready to talk to you guys, I kind of looked back on my life and like, where was the pivot? I mean, I think when we got married, we knew that we should tithe, and I would probably call us tickle tither in the beginning. And just because, you know, it was something we knew we should do. But remember, I'm a numbers and spreadsheet gal, and I'm very performance driven. So I started measuring our giving, and God just touched my heart. I met a woman that owned her own business with her husband and were super generous. And I could not get enough of the stories from her. Like, wait, what did you do here? Who did you give to? Why did you give? And I probably became a little obsessive with the idea how much God talked about money, how important it was. I read every single book there was about God and money. And I will be honest with you, for a long time, it was more legalistic than probably a heart thing. I would say that I probably had years of just like, well, I'm going to make sure that I give, my 10%. And in fact, before I came to talk to you today, I went back to my little spreadsheet and I was very prideful in my generosity. I will admit that to you that, I was trying to catch up from the beginning of the first time my husband and I filed our tax return. So again, real legalistic in my giving, I think, for probably the first 20 years of our marriage.
So as a CPA, potentially seeing tons and tons of tax returns, you really get a perspective on how other people manage money. And if you're looking through the Schedule A, you can see exactly what they give or don't give. And it's very different than hearing a story. You get to see the hard data. And I'm wondering if that perspective, do you feel like that helped you? Or in some ways, I can relate to what you're saying, is I've taken pride in the amount of a gift or something, and you see other people's giving, and it creates this dynamic. And I don't know how to unpack that. Was that ever a factor for you?
It's so funny. I was shocked at how many wealthy people, right? Because if you're giving your taxes to KPMG, then you probably make a lot of money. And how many people were not generous. You look at the statistics, and I think I'm right to say that like 2 to 3% of Christians tithe. So obviously, working at KPMG, we were dealing with Christians and non-Christians. So it was eye-opening, thinking, gosh, they have all this money and they can't give some of it away. And I have to tell you that I'm a little bit of a compareaholic, so I have to be careful. So if I was at my job at KPMG looking at people giving nothing and me giving my 10%, I think I was pretty proud of myself. But then I would go to the GG conference. I think my first GG conference, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm not giving near enough away. So about 10 years ago, God said, quit looking right, quit looking left. Look at me. Let's deal with you and me.
Tell us more about when you went to Generous Giving. I was there when that happened, and you and I had met in a women's networking thing. And I just was always fascinated because I experienced you already as very, very generous, but I know that was a significant turning point for you.
Well, what's interesting is the first time that I went to GG, I'm not sure which one you're talking about, but the first time I went was probably 10 years ago. And my husband and I went, and we were it was 15 years ago because the business is 15 years old. And we were at a crux in our business where we really could lose it all. So we had bought a business, we had paid a lot of money. And about 6 months in, we realized that we had been defrauded a little bit. And I had signed a non-compete on the company I had sold. So I had nothing to do but just dig in. And I went to Generous Giving with him, and I thought, what are we doing here? We're going to have to be pulling back on these commitments that we had given to people because we're not making the money we were supposed to make. And I think I wrestled a little bit with God on, why am I even here? And at that conference, that very first conference, he told my husband and I both, well, why don't y'all start praying together? If y'all are so serious about running a business together. And so that was a big turning point for us. We just really kind of gave it all to the Lord and said, okay, we'll test you on this. Let's see what we're supposed to do next. I actually looked up the verse today. It's in Malachi that God says, test me on bringing your tithes to the storehouse. And I will tell you, I think I did try to test him. And ever since then, he's just continued to bless us beyond measure. We really can't outgive him. It's unbelievable. And it's just so amazing to see God's faithfulness, because at one point, the other thing that happened was that a good friend of mine suffered with fear, a lot of fear in her life. And I had never been fearful of anything. Why should I? I had been successful, and what do I have to fear? But I got a spirit of fear around losing that money and maybe our business going under that was palpable, that I had to go back to my friend and apologize and say, I'm really sorry. Because we all struggle with different things. And I had just never had that fear grip me like it did that time.
Leigh Ann, I also love how your dad modeled generosity to you. I think that one of the little capers that you do now came out of his life. Will you share that?
Sure. My dad, gosh, it was 30 years ago, with some men in Central Florida, started a foundation, and they basically give away money anonymously in the name of Jesus Christ. The actual application for the private foundation said to love people through Jesus Christ. So they have done this forever. And I came alongside him about 10 years ago and got involved. And during COVID, we've had a lot of fun. We've probably given away 450 envelopes with $50 in it to people just as the Holy Spirit leads. There's probably 20 people on the board. And it's just been really remarkable just to kind of see the stories of hope for people.
And I remember actually, I called you on a whim and told you about this event we were doing with Women Doing Well, thinking you were already living this life, and you came. So tell us a little bit about what happened for you as a female giver.
So I have a lot of Christian friends and I feel very blessed. I have great family, but I don't necessarily have a huge circle of people that love generosity as much as I did. So for the first time, when Julie invited me to the patron event and we were in California, I was in a room full of women who generosity was their thing. And I just felt like finally I'm in a like-minded room, and it's been a lot of fun since, just the relationships and helping people understand their purpose, passion, and plan around money. We got a lot of work still to do, but it's exciting.
Well, and she says that because she called me up after that event and she says, "Hey, Julie, I love what you're doing. This is like totally up my alley. What do you need? I'm here. I'm all in. What can I do?" I go, "You want to be the board chair?"
I was like, Julie, that's not how it goes. I go, you get on a board and you learn about the board and then you become the chair a couple years later. She's like, no, we're going to just do it this way.
Yeah, I had been the board chair and the executive director because as soon as we launched in January of 2020, COVID hit and no one wanted to be the board chair. So it was like such a gift when she stepped in, and because we had had such a long relationship and I knew her generosity. I had experienced it. I guess 15 years earlier, we were serving on the board of J4 Leaders in Orlando, and my life was falling apart. I mean, it was just crumbling by God's design so I could be healed. And as it was coming back together, I met my husband and we had planned our wedding in Orlando. The venue fell apart right after I sent the save the dates out. So I've got all these hotels booked, with the room rates. And I mentioned it to this board. I said, would y'all pray because I don't know what to do? And Leigh Ann, just without hesitation, "Oh my gosh, I'll host you at the country club." And I looked at her, I was like, "I don't want you to pay for my wedding." She goes, "I'm not going to pay for it, but I'll host you and it'll be so great." And when I say that wedding was an answer to prayer, it's hard to even put it into words how much God used. I got the exact wedding I wanted, but it was her using what she had, which was a club membership, to open up the opportunity. So I sent her my Christmas card for years. I don't think we spoke much in that 15 years from that point on, because I got married, had Ella, moved to Richmond, and just we might have crossed paths at Generous Giving once or twice, but that was about it. So it was a big jump to go from that to be the board chair. But you're all in, and I love that about you.
Yeah, and it's been an amazing couple years with Women Doing Well.
So, Leigh Ann, I know, especially in Women Doing Well, there's a big focus on kind of trying to find your specific purpose, how God has really designed you as a giver, in addition to the things that we're all called to, but kind of the unique design of that. How have you seen God kind of clarify that over the years in terms of how he tends to use you and work through you?
So I got my 2-word purpose statement a few years ago, and it's expanding territory. And it's only been in the last few years as I start to really understand what God means behind that. And I am a serial entrepreneur. I have 4 different businesses going right now. And then we had a strat op for Women Doing Well. And the guy that was doing it basically told us, hey, this is actually a movement. This idea of helping women learn their purpose, passion, and plan behind their giving is a movement. And I'm like, well, there we go, expanding territory. we got a lot of women to talk to in the next 6 years.
Leigh Ann, you have hinted at it a couple times, but I think there's a lot of benefit to having structure and to having a plan and goals. But I think there's a couple traps we can fall in. One is feeling shame if we don't hit our goals. The other is if we aim too low, we might actually not be as in tune to listening to God's voice. And he might call us into beyond what we have imagined for ourselves. And it sounds like through these different experiences and communities that you've gained a deeper understanding of what generosity looks like. Can you share a little bit more about how that has played out as your territory has expanded?
Sure. So when I realized that I was being legalistic in my giving, what I did was I stopped looking at my personal financial balance sheet. I quit trying to measure everything, and I really just tried to become more free-handed in it. And basically, as we took distributions for different companies, we would just put money over in a DAF. And lo and behold, again, I really didn't know where it stood because I've made on purpose, not trying to go back and measure. But before we talked today, I went back and I measured. And I had a very funny thing happen with God for 3 years. And if you're not a numbers person, you won't understand this. But if you're a numbers person, you'll get it. I accidentally paid tax on an accrual basis financials for 3 years because we switched softwares. So I overpaid my taxes for 3 years. And we found out last year when they switched it back to cash basis, I had this huge NOL. So I have been way over giving, which I thought was hilarious. I thought it was like, whoa, I'm getting to 12, 13%. And today I went back, and since the beginning of our marriage, we're now at 17.2% of our giving from day one. But that was God almost like tricking me. So he kind of said to me like, okay, so now what are you going to do? So we'll see. Kind of crazy.
You mentioned a couple transition periods throughout your story, and I'd love to hear some of the core ideas or concepts that have really stood out that God has shown you over time that have really taken your journey to the next level, really expanded your understanding of purpose, generosity, all of this kind of lumped in together, and in things that have just kind of been a theme and a core conviction for you since then.
Yeah, that's a great one. And one that stands out to me is that I was in a church service one time and our pastor said, if anybody in here feels guilty about what they have, and I'm thinking, oh, I kind of feel guilty. He was like, then you think you own it. And let me be clear that all of us are just stewards of it. So I really worked hard to continue to just say, it doesn't matter what I have because it's not mine. I am literally just a steward. And when we give our money over to money managers, we don't say, here you go, take my money. We say, hey, help me manage this. And that's all we are. And that I think has been pivotal in changing my attitude. Like I'm just managing it for the short time that I'm on this earth. That has been a big one. And I think the other one that's probably been real important for me is the comparison. I have struggled with comparison my whole life. Again, not looking even at good things, don't look, but just look to the Lord to guide me and to guide our family and my husband and I and our business, because it's just so easy to get caught up in that.
Leigh Ann, maybe talk a little bit about your family. I love your family, but how does it look? How do you and Vince work things out? What about the kids? You have more adult children now, but I know they've been on their own journeys.
Yeah. So I have a 21 and a 25-year-old daughter first who just got married and son who's a junior in college. And about 5 years ago, we started getting them involved in our giving at the year end. Somebody had told us it's really good practice to start having your kids help you decide. And then as they get older, my daughter started making her own money in the last 2 years. I thought, well, you've gotten good at giving my money away. Now let's see what we're going to do about your money. So she promises me that she's tithing. So I grew up in a family, which is very unusual. My dad was super open and transparent about money. And when I tell people this, they're like, wait, what? In fact, when I got married to my husband, he was like, quit talking about money in front of people. And I'm like, what do you mean? You're like, that is not normal. And I think that's a little bit of a problem with our society is that people are not taught and they're not told, and there's shame behind it. There's embarrassment. There's all kinds of things associated with money. And we make money so emotional. And I did not come from that background. It was just kind of all black and white, and money was just a tool. And that's kind of how we're trying to help our kids look at it.
Leigh Ann, I can relate to that because working as a financial advisor, I talk about and work with money with all kinds of different people, and there's no judgment. It's like, hey, let's solve this problem together. And I find myself, even at like a social gathering, when people kind of learn that about me, I think they want to talk about it in a way that they're not going to be all the stuff that comes with a certain financial situation, right? They're like, hey, I need some guidance. I need some help. And I'm sure you can relate to that also working in the financial industry. But Leigh Ann, you mentioned that you got your kids involved in helping decide where to give. How have you made those decisions over time?
Again, back to that whole finding your purpose. I think as you know what your purpose is, then you can figure out where your passions align. And I think I'm 53. And when I turned 50, I finally learned the word no. Like, that's a great ministry, but that is not in line with my passions. So we've tried with my husband and my kids, like, we can say no. We do not have to say yes. We're talking about this weekend with a woman, and she said she always gives a little bit every time she's asked. So she doesn't have to feel bad, but it might be small. But then she gives meaningful sums to things that she's super passionate about. And I've tried to not have any judgment on anything they want to give to, because I know it's something that God's laying on their heart.
I'm curious, as you have gone through some of your journey, what you wish more women understood about generosity, specifically unique to women, and some of your experience. You mentioned, working with women doing well. And I know there's a lot of focus on trying to unite and share stories. And, what have you learned, and what do you wish more people understood, or misconceptions that are out there?
Well, it's so interesting because every woman and man, but every person's journey is so different. And what's so neat about when we go through this pathway, you can see women's eyes kind of light up in the different things and like, aha, start where you are. It doesn't matter if you've only given a tiny bit before. Like, you can start anytime, and you can do time, you can do treasures, you can do talent. It all matters. In fact, I learned through teaching the pathway that I actually need to give more of my time. I can write a check in a New York minute, but I am really selfish sometimes when it comes to my time. So I am forcing myself to give my time mentoring, because my time is even more valuable than my money these days. I just love it as women get free from feeling, just gaining knowledge, because I think so many women, I'm thinking about some of the women in my group, it's always kind of been, let me just see what my husband thinks type thing. And they haven't really, and a lot of women, don't even know what their financial situation is. And it makes me sad, but I love it when people start to have conversations. There was a woman who gave her testimony this past couple of days, and she and her husband he's really come alongside her in her journey. It was her first that was generous, and now it's brought them closer together. Their marriage is better. I just think when people loosen up the things that they think are theirs, things start to happen. It's just remarkable.
We were also at a dinner together where it was so encouraging to hear a woman share that she was so reluctant, and her husband was like, honey, please, what are you afraid of? Please give. I want you to give. And she's like, okay. And she came to him and said, well, there's this other way to give, and I'm not sure I should do it because it's kind of a lot more. And he's like, well, why would you go small? And she's like, I don't know. Isn't that what you're supposed to do? And he said, I'm going to challenge you. Pray about it, honey. You have the money. So if you have it, you should give it. And it was incredible to hear that a man came alongside his wife and encouraged her unique generosity. And I think so it goes both ways, like seeing women wake up that it's okay to talk about what you have, to connect with other women, to connect with your spouse and talk about money is very healthy. And then also for men to say, I don't see you engaging and I really want a partner in this. Will you please engage with me? I'd love for you to get equipped. And I think that's where we feel at Women Doing Well, we have a unique role in this season to just be a safe place. If you don't feel comfortable as a woman around money, you'll just be with other women, which can be helpful when you feel like you don't know the terminology and you don't want to look stupid or make your husband look bad by asking your silly question that you, of course, should know the answer to. So all of this is part of what's happening in the wealth transfer. And I think Leigh Ann's just been a huge encouragement because of what she shared. She talks about it. And she's so open about how excited she is to give money and talk about it. And that frees other women to talk about it.
And I wanted to come back to some of what you're talking about entrepreneurship and business, obviously a big passion of yours, and sounds like God has really used you in that area. How has some of this generosity journey affected how you think about business, how you think about entrepreneurship, and how does all that kind of interact?
So I think being a business owner, I'm allowed to talk about, because I run the business, I'm allowed to talk about what I want to talk about. And that was a freedom. I mean, I've owned my own business for 25 years, but I think sharing this with employees and partners and really living it out has been so exciting. And again, the best thing you can do is copy people. So I think I was at a GG event and I heard about this guy who had a giving fund, and if their employees gave, we put a limit on it. We did up to $5,000. We would match. And it's crazy how little that happens, and we keep telling them, and I want to, again, encourage without putting any shame around any of it. But then it's when push comes to shove, we've got quite a few employees who are dealing with a spouse that has cancer or maybe cancer themselves. And sometimes it's anonymous. We might go through Florida Fellowship. One of my partners just gave some money to one of our employees and they didn't know it, because Florida Fellowship is this umbrella that says that this gift has been given by somebody who loves the Lord and wants to bless you or whatever. But really being available for people, whether that's money or just coming alongside them when they're hurting. One of our employees' husband's going through a multiple myeloma. So we don't have employees that work from home, but she's working from home and she's making it work. And so that's been a big blessing for her for the last 6 months.
Leigh Ann, you've also been part of something that's, I feel like, a very new topic, but definitely not new, but new for the masses, of impact investing. Tell them about how you got looped into that group and what you've been learning.
That has been super eye-opening because, okay, again, I'm a CPA and I like to check some boxes and get all my ducks in a row. So you've got your giving in line, and then all of a sudden they're posing these questions like, well, where's your 401k invested in? And are you willing to give up some profit on an investment to do things like employ people in Africa or the Dominican Republic? And that was a little bit eye-opening for me because, again, I kind of siloed things. I think, well, if it's investing, I should make X return. And all of a sudden, this idea of impact investing, I really had to wrestle with it and talk through like, okay, is it okay if I just earn 4 or 5%, as opposed to 20% on an investment? So what I did, I told the people from the Impact Foundation, Talented, there's a whole representatives, we were talking through it. I said that basically what I do now is I just add 10%. 10% is God's number anyway. So whatever they tell me that this impact investment is made, like if it's 5%, I'm like, well, it really made 10 because God's on top of it. Because you can't necessarily measure water wells, in Africa or jobs, Masaka Creamery. So I've decided to arbitrarily put an extra 10% on the returns for impact investing.
I like that. It is hard to measure impact. And I think that's a big conversation in the impact investing space is,
Yep.
There's so much energy around wanting to have impact. And then how do you actually know how much impact there was? And how does financial gain translate into impact? Is if you cut your financial gain by half, How do you know how much impact that should be having and stuff? So I like kind of just developing your own framework.
It just made me feel better, you know?
Yeah, yeah. And to kind of, create an incentive for yourself to just have it all kind of fit together. Very CPA way to approach it. I like that.
Well, and I used to just think, well, I'll just make a bunch of more money and give a bunch more away. And they've really challenged that thought, but we really still need to solve some problems like poverty and homelessness. So still, I'm not there yet, but I'm working on it.
I think that's one of the biggest lessons for me is how much women want to learn and they just aren't invited in. So we happen to have one of the founders of Women Doing Well went through FDI, Faith Driven Investors course. And she called me and said, I have a group of women, Julie, and they want to keep meeting. And that didn't surprise me because I'm always surprised that they want to keep going after the pathway. I'm like, we're done. You're set free. Go give. You don't have anything. And they're like, no, we want to keep meeting. It's like, oh gosh, okay. So faith-driven investor becomes an off-ramp for a group. So Charlotte took this group through the faith-driven investor. They had been through the pathway. Now they're going through this. And most of these women were like Leigh Ann. They were super financially engaged. They had been really active in their family foundations. They had set things up, but none of them knew the terminology. And a couple of them told me, I was always curious, but who's going to ask the question? Like, I should know what impact investing is. And so I think it's also been this beautiful way to educate women. And I think women uniquely, even CPAs, our brains, we really want to make the whole better. And so impact investing, when you can figure out how to measure it for yourself, like you have, Leigh Ann, can really make a difference. Like I'm the type that I'd much prefer to invest in some woman who's running a business in India, knowing that my dollars aren't just grants, just individual philanthropy dollars, but they're actually helping her run a business and I'm going to get a little bit back and I'm going to turn around and give it back to her. So I'm less concerned about that return because I'm a impact person. That's sort of what runs my show. But I think equipping women with the knowledge that this is one of the ways that you can further the kingdom and use what money God has given you has been phenomenal.
Yeah, this is maybe a question for both you, Julie, and you, Leigh Ann. I recently took a course from the faith-driven world, the Solving the World's Greatest Problems, and they did these videos, and it was 6 weeks and really good. But one of the focus areas was exactly what you're talking about. And one of the reflection questions is, how can we make a difference collectively, right? But it took it to a personal level. What am I going to do about it? So I'd love to hear your perspective. How can we better equip? How can we better invite, right, specifically women into this conversation, into this space where there's currently underrepresentation?
One of my friends, I think it was Kimberly Thornberry, actually, from Murdoch Trust. I read something that she wrote this morning, and it just has captured my imagination. She said, isn't it interesting that we call businesses for profit and we call social organizations non-profit? Just those very words, non-profit. Really? There's no profit to social good? No, there's a huge profit. You just can't measure it in dollars. So I think engaging women around the ideas that even if you don't understand how the financial world works, you can learn. And then what you do bring in general, this is generalizations, but a woman's brain cares about the whole. She cares about her family and the extended community. And many of us care about the world and the world problems. So I think the way a woman's brain is wired, what she'll bring to that conversation is amazing, but she will not show up if she doesn't feel confident. So I think it's just getting women equipped and confident that you don't have to know, you just ask. And here's how you ask this question of a financial services company like your financial advisor, or how you ask the executive director, tell me how the money's being used. I would love to understand how you approach it, because women just generally, if we don't think it's our business and we don't have confidence, we'd just be quiet. We'll just be quiet. We'll think, oh, that's none of my business. I shouldn't talk. But when we do talk, we generally have really helpful things to add to the conversation. So I think it's a combination of getting women confident to just offer before they're asked. But then also, I think there's an equal side where I have so many guy friends and men partners in this ministry world who are actively engaging women. And I think it's easy questions like, hey, I'd really love your input on this. I know it's not your specialty, but you'll have so much to add. Just assuring that woman that you want her input and that you'll listen to her will go a long way. So that's just been my experience.
Yeah, that's good. And again, that's why I think we're so eager to see so many more women go through the pathway, because it really equips them to almost figure out what they don't know. If there's a topic, there's a idea, oh gosh, I'm not really sure, and I need to pray about what stirs my heart. We know there's lots of things that breaks God's heart, but what breaks my heart too?
Yeah, the pathway is really designed as a personal journey. Somebody recently told me that how she experiences the difference between the two transformational tools that we know about, the journey of generosity and the Women Doing Well pathway, is that the journey of generosity is just such a beautiful deep dive into the biblical waters of God's heart for the things that he's entrusted to you and how you can be using those for kingdom impact. At Women Doing Well, we certainly touch on those things. That's foundational, but we really dive deeply into who has God made you so that you can offer and show up full-hearted with what you have and bold, like no more sitting on the sidelines, being a wallflower, like get in the kingdom game because the team needs you, right? Like I don't meet many people who are like, I wish women would just sit on the bench. Like nobody says that, but it's sort of this untalked about thing. And it's changing, I think, because of the wealth transfer, right? 70% of the wealth by 2030 will be in the hands of women. And that's a conservative number. I think it could be much more than that. And 2030 is 6 years away. So equipping women over the next 6 years is imperative. And I don't know of a better tool. I'm sure one-on-one there are people doing things, but as far as like the worlds that I'm in, I think our pathway really gives you a great, simple way to get that done. And then we want to launch you out and connect you to great things that exist.
I think that one of the things that's standing out from a lot of what you both are kind of talking about is knowing what's out there, what kind of tools and resources are there. And you mentioned some great ones in a lot of what you're just saying. And that's been very true for me as well. I know for Cody also, you already mentioned, one or two different courses or programs and things he's been through. And I think that that's, a really powerful step for a lot of people. Is it just, whether Women Doing Well or Journey of Generosity or Faith Driven Investor, any of these, and they're all hitting different points of the conversation, but they're introducing you to some of what's out there. We talk on the podcast about some of this idea of spiritual templating, but when you can see other people's stories, then all of a sudden it's like the lights go on and you're like, oh, this makes sense. I can do this, or it gives you a totally new idea that nobody's ever done before. So I think really the theme of all of that is community and, trying to walk with people and beside people, and not just in the beginning, but through the whole journey. Because, I thought I had figured everything out before we started this podcast, and man, do I think differently now than I did then, just from hearing, all these stories and stuff. But, Leigh Ann, I'd love to hear, how has community been an important part of your journey, and how has that evolved over time? You've been a part of many different things, but, what has that meant to you?
I love that you said that, because iron really does sharpen iron. And whether it's Women Doing Well, whether it's generous giving, whether it's an NCF, I'm on the advisory board, I pick up information and nuggets, and now FDI. Like, it's just amazing how, I feel like 20 years ago, people really weren't talking about money. And now it's being talked about. And it's so exciting, because that's how we are going to grow. That's how we're going to step up and be a little bit more uncomfortable the next time. I mean, the whole idea, I think this next FDI plus somebody mentioned to me was like that 20% of your, investment portfolio is an impact. That's their goal eventually. I was like, okay, you just keep feeling uncomfortable about these things. And I think that we heard a woman talk about the whispers of the Lord. And usually those whispers make you feel uncomfortable, but they're insistent, and God won't let you go until you start acting on some of these whispers he gives us. And we have a business partner in our newer company. And I came back, and today I talked his ear off about being generous and opening a DAF for himself. And I just said, I think that God's already blessing us because he looks at generosity as like helping. He's got two stepchildren and then he's got a niece and a nephew that he pays for their college. And I totally believe that helping your family is the first thing you should do, widows and orphans type things. But I just was challenging and he's like, I'm listening. The Holy Spirit's pricking me. So it's fun. It's fun to kind of challenge each other and spur each other on to new and bigger things.
Yeah, I love that you've leveraged every kind of relationship to be a fire starter and just plant seeds where you're inviting people into new perspectives that the Lord has taught you. And I think we're all called to that in all kinds of areas of our lives. As he teaches us, we can pass that along. And it's a form of discipleship, really. It teaches us something about the nature of God and also what we can do about it. So I love that you are actively inviting people into that, even in environments where it might be a little more uncomfortable. But there is so much joy that is produced from giving our time, talents, and treasures. But what do you find are some of the more challenging aspects around generosity?
It's funny. Always comes down to pride when it's not my idea. So like I saw you all had talked about this question. I thought, where have I been challenged? And I'll be honest, like I like it to be my idea. And not too long ago, my husband came to me and was like, we've given to this one foundation that's for a Christian camp. And he's like, hey, I think we need to give more there. And I'm like, you gave a lot there. But then I was like, I can't believe like I would, like he wants to give more. Of course we'll give more. So I think sometimes when it's not my idea, but if it's my husband's or my children, then, I gotta listen up.
You also use your stuff a lot. Talk to us about how you use your properties.
So we have a couple of second homes. We have a condo on a beach and we've got a house on a riverfront. And the house is pretty big and we had a decorator decorate the whole thing and everything was super pristine. And I remember being at my parents', brand new mountain house and being like, oh gosh, she didn't want me to sit on that couch because I could mess it up. And I remember thinking, that's no fun. Why do you have this stuff if we can't, live on it and have the kids jump on the couches, right? So recently, somebody gave a really good perspective. Again, I think this idea of talking about it with each other and what do you struggle with and how can you help? She said that if you've got some place that you let people use and something happens, that you need to think of it as like, let's say you spill red wine on my new white couch. I need to think of that as a love scar. And I was like, okay. So now if something breaks, I'm kind of like, somebody was really loving each other well here. So that was good, but it's not always easy. But I use the words like, we can just buy another one. It can just be replaced. It's no big deal. I try really hard not to get caught up about stuff like that.
I've thought of that kind of concept in a number of various scenarios. And we're called to be a servant, right? To have a servant mindset. And just like you were kind of saying earlier, I often like that to be on my terms. Like, all right, I'm choosing, this is how I'm going to be a servant. And I've defined all the parameters. Now I'm being a servant. And then as soon as it's outside of those parameters, it's like, oh, now I'm being a servant in a way that I wasn't intending to be. Then the bitterness or frustration or whatever sets in, and kind of reframing that to be like, this is an extension of that servant mindset that Christ demonstrates. And he's inviting a deeper level of that. Those unexpected kind of scenarios always make me think of that.
And by the way, I'm going to dinner with my husband tonight. I'm going to tell him he can give as much money as he wants to that foundation. You can hold me accountable.
When you were saying that, it reminded me, my wife and I, a long time ago, just kind of almost accidentally came up with the policy that whenever there's some kind of giving decision to be made, whoever came up with the higher amount is the trump card. And so we'll be like listening to something, and then we're both kind of like thinking, have our number written down or something, and it'll be like, what were you thinking? And then the one we'll share. She surprised me so many times where I had like some amount I thought was going to be, like, oh yeah, this is generous. And then she's like multiples of that. And I'm like, whoa, I was way off here. But I guess that's where we're going.
I like that rule. I'm going to adopt it. Yep. Whoever gives the higher amount, go for it. I'm sure y'all have done that with like capital campaigns at church and stuff. Like, okay, everybody pray about it, and
Yeah.
we're like, what's your number? What's your number?
Hmm.
I feel like I always hear the stories where they get the same number. And I'm like,
Yes.
oh, I want to get the same number.
Yeah.
I think that does happen sometimes for Steph and I, but there have been some moments where we do talk about money, but I'm doing a lot of the day-to-day management, and she'll ask questions like, well, how much do we have to give? And I'm like, forget about that entirely. Let me know what you think is reasonable. And sometimes, she'll be like, well, maybe this. And I'm like, yeah, we could absolutely do that. And then she like 10X's it. I'm like, whoa. Like, we got to talk about this. I think it really reveals something about me, right?
That's what I was
Because
thinking.
it's like, I feel like I set the boundaries, and then as long as she lands within those boundaries, I'm like, wait a second, it's not even my money, So I feel like there's so much growth to be done in that process of getting an unexpected answer that's actually pretty far from what you wanted or what you picked, I guess. So I really appreciate that you brought that up.
Cody, I want to go back to a question you had for Leigh Ann that she hit on, but there's a deeper part of community that we're even experiencing in this conversation. And that is, there's an element of healing that happens when we say our things out loud and when we hear somebody else share a vulnerability. There's a powerful reality. I don't know what the right term is, but it's a connectedness at the heart level that you either receive something from someone else or you, in your own vulnerability, give that to someone else. But you really can't do that unless you're in community. And I find that a lot of the Christian circle stuff that I'm in can often feel very surfacey. But there's something beautiful when you bring up generosity. It just goes instantly down to the heart level. It's an awkward feeling to bring it up. But then when you do, it's like you skip about 7 steps of a friendship if you start in a generosity conversation. And it's what everyone wants the most. Mm-hmm. Our hearts need connection and community. And I believe so deeply that generosity is such a pathway to healing and community, and then ultimately to that deep, satisfying joy that Scripture promises us. So I'd love anybody to share more about how you've experienced growth in community, because I think it's something that people think, oh, I don't need that. My wife and I are fine, or we'll just keep our little, we'll go to that thing, but we're not going to open up. So would love to hear your thoughts. I'm thinking specifically about the Morehouse. I'm thinking about, what happened this weekend. You don't have to name it, but the vulnerability, like however that's impacted you or how you've seen your vulnerability impact another woman, anything along those lines. I just think it's giving life to that idea.
Yeah. So many times, MC talked about this, so many times when you write a check, especially like a big check, you don't even feel anything. You just kind of write it. You've got money in your DAF, and it's the things that you do, like buying her a painting this weekend. A good friend of ours had some hurt around art, and we went to this beautiful art. And I said, I just felt the Holy Spirit. It was the prick, right? Just, hey, tell her to pick out a painting, and you're not going to give it to your DAF. You're going to give real dollars. You're just going to buy it. And I think it's times like that are really electric. Like you really feel like the Holy Spirit was a part of it, when it's not so planned and you're just waiting for the Holy Spirit to move us in a generous way. This is the silliest example, but today we had prayer group and I have roses. I have a guy that takes care of about 25 bushes. And so every day I get to go and pick roses, cutting roses, and I give them away. I take them to my office. So I just gotten back last night from being away. So I hadn't been cutting them. So I'm going away this weekend. Some friends are coming. I had 2 things of roses in my refrigerator, and my prayer group girls come. And one of my girls says, hey, do you have any extra roses? And I was like, I do, but I wanted them. I said that to myself. Like I was arguing with myself. I'm like, and I was like, of course I have extra roses, but, I think I'm so generous. And then for a hot second, I didn't want to give her one of my thing of roses. So, it's just, you're always working on yourself, I guess.
I really do believe that generosity is best done as a team sport. And there is a vibrant, exciting generosity community, and it's global, and it's people from all different backgrounds. It's a really wonderful representation of the body of Christ and people who are out there living it. And that's my favorite part. I think just having Keelan to talk to, we probably talk every day and have for a long time. But I mean, this podcast has provided so much community. It's the reason we know both of you. So I think that's really what keeps us fired up and going. And there's seasons where it's tough to put an emphasis on these kinds of things. And then you hear a story and you're right back in it. So I think that just reinforces all of the benefits for us as the givers, but certainly the reminder that God has invited us into and called us to live this way. Leigh Ann, I've loved hearing about so many of the things that God is doing and has done in your life. What are you most excited about over the next 5 or 10 years?
I would have to say it has to do with women doing well and helping more women understand their purpose, plan, and passion around giving. It just fires me up. I'm like, growing the businesses I have is not near as exciting as it used to be, as I've kind of gotten hold that expanding territory is my 2-word purpose statement and generosity is my get to.
Yeah, I think that's been the theme of a lot of people we've talked to is, they have what they're really good at in the world. But then once you really kind of dive deep into generosity, it just changes the color spectrum that you see things in. And it's just like what you want to see advanced, what you want to see, people's eyes opened. Really a lot of parallels to faith in general, in the same way that once you really have that relationship with Christ, you just want to see other people experience that. In the same way with generosity, you just want to make it bigger and bigger and bigger. And so I resonate a lot with that. As we get to the end of the episode, I did want to leave some time for our manager's minute. So we like to just end every episode with a practical action our listeners can take to step into their role as stewards and manage God's wealth wisely. So Leigh Ann, do you have a suggestion for our listeners today?
Yeah, I would challenge everybody to be really conscious about doing or giving something to somebody every week. And when I say that, it could be paying for somebody's meal at a restaurant that they don't even know, or it can be buying somebody's gas as you're leaving, just if this is a little bit new for you, just like my preacher used to say, get your body in the right spot. Like if we're going to have to go take a walk to get healthy, we have to put our shoes on. So if you want to start being more generous, you have to start with acts of generosity. So that's my challenge to the listeners out there.
Yeah, I really love that challenge, and specifically for a few groups of people, and that's anyone who is college age or younger, who's not yet managing most of their own finances in most cases. It's people who will be inheriting wealth over the next, 20, 30 years or forever, right? To get in the habit of acting generously, right? Because that develops your heart as well. And it helps tune your ear to the Holy Spirit. And if and when more resources are added, it's so much easier to do something that you're used to doing. So thank you so much for sharing. Leigh Ann, it's been a pleasure having you join us. I'm so excited about all of the things that God has his fingerprints on in your life, and we can't wait to see where he takes you next.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to the show, guys. If you want to find any of our references or links from today's show, you can always find them in our show notes at finishlinepledge.com/episode 116. Before we finish up, I have a quick question for you. Have you ever stopped to answer the question, how much is enough? The Financial Finish Line is designed to help you do just that. Our 90-day Finish Line Pledge breaks down the process into 3 easy steps. Step 1, define how much is enough for your family to spend in a single month, and use that as your monthly spending budget for 90 days. Step 2, as God provides money to manage, set aside any margin outside of your finish line into a separate bank account. Step 3, after 90 days, explore the millions of ways you can use the margin you've set aside to create joy, purpose, and impact in God's kingdom. Want to learn more? Check out our website at finishlinepledge.com. That's all we have for today. We'll see you next time.